Hi, Gary Stearman. Time for another update from Prophecy Watchers. In studio with me today, author and lecturer Bill Salus. And Bill, we're approaching now about a week past the Donald Trump announcement concerning Jerusalem. And these are significant times in which we live, aren't they?
Well, it really is. And we have to ask ourselves, is God making a statement now with moving the focus now on Jerusalem being acknowledged by the greatest superpower to accepting it as Israel's capital? You know, since Israel became a nation, and they're coming up on their 70-year anniversary here, two anniversaries here. The partition plan on November 29th of 1947 recently had that 70-year anniversary, which legislated the reestablishment of Israel. We got the other one coming up on May 14th, the actual rebirth of Israel in 1948, that 70-year anniversary. And for 70 years, we've had 12 American presidents, dozens of Arab leaders, hundreds of international leaders have all ignored the biblical fact that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Is God making a statement right now that no longer can that be ignored? And if he is, then now we got a whole other topic to talk about, what could happen.
And by the way, there's going to be a lot of resistance to this idea because, as you know, it's been floated for years that the American embassy should be relocated from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and there should be a capital in Jerusalem. And all of these things are a sand in the eyes of the various Arab factions in Israel. I mean, they can hardly contain their bitterness.
Well, just a couple days after the announcement, the United Nations Security Council took its 15 members and had an emergency meeting, and of course America is among those. And 14-1, America being the one, opposed this. It was an emergency meeting. Opposed this confirmation of Trump's.
Now, let's talk about the possible implications of this. Again, going into the 70th anniversary of Israel's statehood next year, early next year, as a matter of fact, early in 2018. I don't know what kind of festivities there will be in Jerusalem. I'm sure they have something big planned for Israel Independence Day.
Well, you said something interesting to me that I did not realize about their Hebrew calendar. So we're looking toward May 14th, but you might have a different date in April.
Well, there's the 5th of ER, and the 5th of ER next year will be the actual Jewish date. That falls, I think, about April 20th. Okay. So between May 14th and April 20th, there's sort of a muddy period, depending on which calendar you're watching.
Yeah, when they started up. It's interesting, the Senate 6 months ago in commemoration of the reunification of Jerusalem, remember 1967, the Six-Day War, they approved the resolution for the Embassy Act, the U.S. Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995, that Trump can abide by the findings of that act and move the embassy. And, it's interesting, some of those findings from the 104th Congress are very telling. So what does it really mean when Trump says he acknowledges Jerusalem as Israel's capital? 4 months ago, your viewers might not be familiar with this, but Vladimir Putin acknowledged West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So he's talking about division here, dividing Jerusalem west versus east. But Trump did not say just West Jerusalem, he said Jerusalem. So the Embassy Act has got some very interesting findings. Finding number 1, every sovereign nation, including Israel, may designate its own capital. Number 2, since 1950, the city of Jerusalem has been the capital of the state of Israel. This is our Congress in 1995. These are the findings. Number 9, Congress strongly believes that Jerusalem must remain an undivided city. Now catch that, an undivided city. Not a West Jerusalem like Russia is saying, or an East Jerusalem like the Palestinians want. So technically, by calling it Jerusalem, he's talking about, from these findings, an undivided city, although he never technically said that. Trump never said that. Finding number 17, which is really important to me, I think, is it says in 1996, the state of Israel will celebrate the 3,000th anniversary of a Jewish presence in Jerusalem since King David's entry. Now, this predates any Arab claims on that area. And so I find it fascinating that we actually are saying that Israel was, according to finding number 17, presently should be an undivided city. And so Trump is acting upon that. But it's kind of vague what he said, basically. He did not necessarily say the undivided city. He's still talking about he's going to let the two sides determine what their their approach to peace would be. He's not setting permanent borders and boundaries. See, so what will happen, I don't know, but I find it fascinating that on 70-year anniversary, remember that 70 years is significant when it comes to the land of Israel. The Babylonian captivity happened. For 70 years, the Lord disciplined the Jews at the time of Nebuchadnezzar and gave the land the 70 years it was owed of Sabbath rest.
That's true.
But for 70 years right now, that land has had no Sabbath rest because the very countries that voted against there ever being in Israel, those Arab states around Israel, they happen to all be in Psalm 83. They have warred against Israel, and they have not allowed that land to have peace at all. Missiles flying in from Hezbollah.
Practically the day after Israel's statehood was declared, they declared war.
Exactly.
And there has been some form of war declaration ever since.
Yeah, so the world has bought into the myth of Palestine, and it's interesting because when the partition plan came out in 1947, it called for Jerusalem to be an international zone, sovereign to the international community, because it was such a hot potato at that time. And it allotted land to the Arabs and land to the Jews, but the Arabs rejected it and went to war, lost the war, and green lines were drawn up in early 1949, which actually the first time the city of Jerusalem had ever been divided. And that didn't last for even 20 years because in 1967, Israel won that war, that Six-Day War, and took over East Jerusalem.
And we haven't even seen the controversy yet. Imagine when the embassy is moved. Where will it be brought into Jerusalem, the American embassy? And also imagine, if you will, a Capitol building. Where will it be built in Jerusalem? Near the Knesset? Nobody has said anything about where it might be, but I see trouble ahead. Anytime something definite like this is proposed, there will be trouble.
Well, he said he will move the embassy. They're designing it now. They want to make it sort of an historic, move and building. I mean, let's face it, they could hang a shingle somewhere now. But, he even said on Huckabee's TVN TV show that he is interested in the peace process, and if it meant the embassy scenario being delayed or whatever. I'm paraphrasing. So, he is focused on that. At the same token, you're absolutely right. What are the things that could happen? Well, what did happen was, first of all, by acknowledging Jerusalem, and if he moves the embassy, it signals that the world's greatest superpower supports Israel's rights to Jerusalem as its undivided capital. Two, it'll further undermine the international control over Jerusalem. Remember, they declared it an international zone and have tried to been monitoring it all this time because of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It'll pave the way for other nations to move their embassies. However, we're hearing like Hungary just recently came out and said, we will not move our embassy there. Czech Republic, who on the same day Trump acknowledged Jerusalem as Israel's capital, said, well, we'll acknowledge West Jerusalem, but they're saying they won't move their embassy. So it doesn't mean they will follow stride, but it does pave the way for that. And then likely it'll provoke a war. Now, what you're hearing from UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and Trump is that we think the truthful reality is being known now. And if you have the truthful reality, you can start talking about peace. This actually could pave the way for peace. But Gary, I will tell you now, the truthful reality is the Arabs will not accept what's going on right now. That's why they had an emergency Organization of Islamic Council, OIC meeting also subsequently. And, and Turkey came out and said they want to sort of be the spokesman against this as well. This is a problem. It could lead to a war, and that's when they'll have their peace, after they win that war.
Well, Bill, as you were going through that kind of a summary of what might happen, I was looking at Zechariah 12:2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people round about when they shall be in siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And some translations say, I will make Jerusalem a cup of poisoning. Or a cup of poison. Mm-hmm. In other words, that's the way they view this whole thing, as poison. And you don't take poison. And then the next verse 3 says, and in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. So you put those two verses together, you have conflict and you have the providence of God. In other words, there may be a lot of conflict, but God is going to oversee this and say, I'm not going to let Jerusalem be ripped apart.
Well, I think these are very poignant verses dealing with prophecies that are relevant for right now at this point in time. Some people take Zechariah 12 and they suggest that's all part of the Armageddon campaign. But I've actually taught at your Prophecy Watchers conference on Zechariah 12 as being a now prophecy. And it's interesting because in verse 2 it talks about, like you said, poison, a cup of poison, a cup of drunkenness in some translations,
Yes.
a cup of trembling. When they lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem, who's they? The surrounding peoples he's talking about. That's the problem we got right now. They have contested, made it unstable in that area over there. Then verse 3 goes on and says that the international community will get involved.
Yes.
They will try to impose a burden upon it as you translate the actual Hebrew in that. When they assemble together, and we've seen that's what they've been doing. They tried to make it an international zone. But what it says to them is that all that try to move it out of its place, or divide it, if you will be cut to pieces, or in some translations, sorely wounded. And that's what we've been doing. We've had this Embassy Act for 20 years now in Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama. They exercised this 6-month waiver all the way along, opting to try to have peace instead of moving the embassy, thinking it would create the war,
Right.
which ultimately will happen. That's what the Bible says will happen. There's all kinds of prophecies dealing with, like Psalm 83 and other war-related things.
This is crazy. But what other country do you know of in the world that is not allowed to have its capital in its capital city? And in fact, when you look at maps, and I'm sure you look at maps of the Middle East, a lot of them do not have the name Israel on the map. They refuse to print the word Israel. And they steadfastly refuse to admit that Jerusalem is anything like a capital city of Israel.
Well, and finding number one, going back to the Embassy Act, every sovereign nation, including Israel, may designate its own capital. Like you just mentioned, they have the right to put their capital there.
Yeah.
So we've got to see how this plays out. Shortly after this came out, I think it was the Times of Israel came out and said, remember that there was that controversy that you couldn't put Jerusalem as your birthplace on your U.S. passports? And
Yes.
there was a mention that you will still not be able to do that. So I'm not sure how that will play out, and I'm not sure once these sides come together and start bickering back and forth, the Arabs and the Jews, if Trump will be inclined to separate West from East or that sort of thing, but he would be in violation of the Embassy Act the minute he starts to do that.
He would be, yeah. That's amazing. Now, one more thing I'd like you to comment on, because here in Zechariah 12, we've read verses 2 and 3, but when you get down to verse 4, in that day, saith the Lord, I'll smite every horse with astonishment, and his rider with madness. I'll open my eyes to the house of Judah, and I will smite every horse of the people with blindness. And it goes on to describe a war that takes place, and Israel is victorious in that war.
Well, it does. You've got to read verses 1 through 6 in Zechariah 12, all in the
Yeah.
same content. What you see happening there in those verses is supernatural invention from the Lord, like he did at the time Pharaoh was pursuing the Jews.
Right.
And it says that he loosened their chariot wheels, and
Right.
malfunctions were going on their artillery. That seems to be what he's saying. He'll strike the horses with madness, the riders with confusion, horses with blindness. But then it goes on to say in that day, still dealing with this
Right.
battle you're talking about, and I believe this could very well be the Psalm 83 conclusion.
It seems to be in
war.
close proximity to the beginning of the chapter. Therefore, this prophecy may be very close.
Right. So in other words, the diplomacy will fail. Jerusalem will be the
Yeah.
hot potato, which we're dealing with right now, as God's making his
Right.
statement. I will no longer be silent on Jerusalem. He's been silent for 70 years, allowed the international community to go oblivious of it. And what it says, though, it's interesting, if you read that last 5 and 6 about the captains of Judah, the IDF is involved in that.
Well, yeah, we have the governors of Judah shall say in their hearts, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength in the Lord of hosts, their God. And in that day I'll make the governors of Judah, and that says governors in the King James.
Yeah.
It may say captain.
It says captains elsewhere. I would read that as the Israeli Defense Forces.
Well,
per se.
the Hebrew word is eluf or elufim, and here's a fascinating note. That Hebrew word is the exact word used in the IDF to denote a lieutenant commander
There you go.
in the
Yeah.
IDF.
Perfect. Yeah.
Called an eluf, translated into King James as governor. In that day I will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and a torch of fire in a sheaf. And I won't read any farther because of time considerations, but it seems likely that
Well,
that
it pictures
Israel
in
is
some
victorious.
translations the battlefield will be like a fire pan, and the battle the warring parties one will be pictured as the sheaves, and it specifically says those surrounding peoples. So that would be the Arabs, and the other would be like a fiery torch. So you understand who's going to win that war.
Oh, yeah.
This will just simply be kindling in that war.
Right.
So I connect that with some of these war prophecies where you see Jordan gets taken to task by the Israeli Defense Forces, Egypt, and I believe that all is part of the bigger prophecy, probably in the Psalm 83 concluding Arab-Israeli war.
Going back all the way to 1948, or you could go back even farther, back to the beginning of the 20th century. But every time Israel has fought a war for its territory, it has won.
And expanded.
And expanded.
And Joshua did this 3,300 years ago. King David did it about 3,000 years ago. Israel did it in 1967. They feel justified in doing that for a couple of reasons. One, it increases their defensible borders.
Right.
And two, that land was given to their patriarch Abraham through Isaac through Jacob in Genesis 15:18, from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through Iraq and Syria today. And they are moving into that land. Now, someday the Messiah will come and give them all that land. The question is, are they going to expand territorially within that land? I believe they are, because you see various verses that talk about Israel winning wars and annexing territory in Jordan,
Absolutely.
southern Lebanon. At the end of Obadiah, it gets clear on that, verses 19 and 20, into parts of Egypt in Isaiah 19, verses 17 and 18. Etc. So
we could go on and on.
Yeah.
And you're listening to Bill Salus, by the way. We have a lot of his materials in our online bookstore, prophecywatchers.com. Just scroll down, click on the online bookstore, scroll down, you'll find Bill's name and many, many products that he's developed over the years. In fact, we now have in stock a debate between you and Joel Richardson on a very important topic. And tell us a little about that debate, because we have that available in the online bookstore.
Just came out. We debated in early November in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We billed it another great Battle of Gettysburg, right? And it was great because enormous research between him presenting the case for Islam as the harlot world religion and Mecca as the central city, and me taking the popular track on that, which is Rome. Pagan Rome morphed into Papal Rome. We got the Vatican there.
Absolutely, and it's fascinating. Mecca, if you look at Mecca as the capital of Islam, and I'm not sure I've ever heard it called that. It's a religious capital, certainly, but Islam as a financial movement, as a monetary movement, I don't know that it has an actual center of power.
Yeah, it's interesting. I brought up that point in the debate with Joel, is that here's all the people who believe that it is Rome, going back to the church fathers, the Protestant reformers, our contemporaries. And I asked him, because he's a very good researcher, and he's, in his Islamic Antichrist teachings and all that sort of stuff, he finds lots of quotes that he puts from other people. And I couldn't find any as I was researching for this debate. And I asked him, is there anybody before 2008? And his answer was basically that, well, you won't really find anybody who will say it's Mecca, but you will find people who believe it was Islam. And he quotes a guy, Nicholas of Lyra, I think it was, around the 13th century. But, if you start looking back then, and all you're doing with the Ottoman Empire, that would be more in the Turkish area, not necessarily the Saudi Arabia. So these are the kind of things we banter back and forth in this debate, Gary.
I'd like to talk to you for another hour and a half, and we're out of time. There's only time to say that if you want to watch this historic debate between Joel Richardson and Bill Salus, we have it right here on DVD, The Identity of Mystery Babylon, Mecca or Rome. And it's fascinating. I've watched it. It'll kind of pull you along and make you think. That's the most important aspect of it. It'll make you think. And for your gift of $25, just click on our online bookstore, scroll down you'll find Bill Salus's name there, and you'll find the offer, The Identity of Mystery Babylon DVD, yours for a gift of $25. Now, as we often do here at Prophecy Watchers, we put things together in packages, and we have what we're calling the Mystery Babylon Debate Package. You'll also find that in the online bookstore under Bill Salus's name. You'll see it there, the Mystery Babylon Debate Package, The Identity of Mystery Babylon DVD, Apocalypse Road, the book. And if you haven't read that book, I think you'll discover that it'll cause you to think. And In fact, everything that Bill puts together makes you think, because he's a great researcher. He goes in depth and detail. So you can either go to our online bookstore, or you can call the 800 number on our screen right now, and for a gift of $50, free shipping in the U.S., by the way, you'll get the Mystery Babylon Debate Package. All good information and good material, and we're going to talk again to Bill Salus. We've run out of time in this session, but we'll be back very soon. Bill, thanks. We
All right,
appreciate
Gary,
it.
thanks.
I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, you keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.